Good afternoon, Ms. Grant. It's Macintosh.
I wonder if we can go back, Ms. Grant, to bundle 25, document 61, at page 1260, which is the statement. We looked at the second paragraph. Can we look at the second line of the third paragraph, in which the Health Board states, for those whose infection episodes were judged by the Case Notes Review panel to be possibly or probably linked to the hospital environment, we apologise unreservedly.
Yep.
Does not an apology on an unreserved basis amount to an acceptance of the conclusion?
I think we wanted to acknowledge that there had been upset and stress in the system for patients and their families, and that's what we were apologising for, the fact that...
Were you just apologising for upset and distress or something else?
It's hard to tell from the words, to be honest, but we were apologising for the fact that it appeared from the report that some of the patients had been affected.
Was this an apology for harm that might have occurred to patients?
It was an apology, I think, because there was a report which said that patients had been affected in a negative way, and we were thoughtful about how, because these patients had already got a whole set of difficult circumstances to deal with, so we were apologising that these things had added to their distress. So we didn't look at it in the way you're trying to ask me about, was it the recommendations or was it this? We just said, okay, if the report says that, then we should move on and try and implement the recommendations. So we were trying to be sensitive to the fact that a report had been published which said that we had lessons to be learnt and things to do, and we were moving forward. But we didn't, well, I didn't crawl all the words in the way that you're describing.
I want to just check that. Are you apologising solely for distress or for actual harm, physical harm, caused by infections?
I don't think we broke it down into that way. We were just apologising to the patients because of what the report had said.
Earlier on, just before lunch, I may have misheard you. You seem to imply that the reason that you didn't address whether the board would accept or reject the conclusions of the CNR was somehow tied up with the fact the board was in stage 4 of the escalation framework. Have I misunderstood you?
So we were in a situation whereby we were at level 4 of the escalation process. We had a number of reports which talked about needing to make improvement, and so therefore our view was that we should accept the recommendations and move forward. And we were also thoughtful about at level 4, we're not in a position to start pushing back on all of the recommendations. Our position was that in terms of moving forward, we should accept that there was improvements to be made, accept the view that people had made recommendations, and that we should put our focus on implementing the recommendations.
How would you respond to the suggestion that by taking such an approach, the board, to some degree, loses the right to later turn around and reject the conclusions of the Case Notes Review?
I think we know things now that we didn't know then. I think, we had a set of circumstances. We had a report written in 2021. I think in 2024-25, other things have emerged. But I still think, rather than focusing on whether the content, and we've put back a lot of comments, as you know, our view was that we should accept the recommendations. And I'm sorry I'm saying the same thing a lot of times, but that's...
No, I appreciate that.
But I do understand if you didn't complain, but when you're in a level 4 escalation, and if you truly want to be sensitive to your patients, and despite what everybody said, we were absolutely focused on the families and the patients, then we didn't want to spend our time having the debate about whether it's right or wrong. We wanted to focus on what can we do to improve and build confidence and move the organisation and the service for the patients forward. And we had hoped that if we We had sought, as I've said to you a few times, external expertise, and some of it was easier to get than others just because of the availability of people and the expertise, because this was the most complex set of circumstances that I think certainly we'd ever experienced, and I think probably the whole of the NHS in Scotland and maybe the UK. And so it's important that if there are different focus on different issues emerging, that as an organisation we try to ensure that those things that people, having spent time looking at things, had said needed to be better or could help us in the future, then that's what we should.
No, I do understand that's what you were going to do and implement the recommendations, but you effectively have described a thoughtful, rational decision by the health board to focus on the recommendations and not set out your criticisms of the conclusions. Is that fair?
The first part is, but we didn't really have a lot of debate about the conclusion. We were thoughtful about the, sorry, I'm saying the same thing again, but we were thoughtful about methodology, and we didn't know which patient was which and so on, and how that had come about. So it wasn't so much at that point that we were critical of the, we were thoughtful about the whole methodology and so on. But it was really, our real focus was on moving forward. So I'm sorry, but I can't.
Yes, so other people are moving forward too. So the patients and their families, they're moving forward too.
Yeah.
And they see this statement, they see this apology. Some of them have had a CNR letter saying that there's a probable link. Some of them have had a CNR letter saying there's a possible link.
Yes.
And they've moved on. And yet at some point later, the health board, as you described, new evidence emerging, takes a particular line. Do you see there's any difficulty with changing your mind later on when they've already moved on themselves, the patients and families?
I think the difficulty is I do understand the point you make, but I think the difficulty is, when we got that report, we were trying to think about, what would families feel like? We were trying to think about that. And if a report says, that there was possible or probable or whatever, then we should apologise that has added to their whole distress or challenge or whatever the word is. So we should apologise if the report says those words. So that's what we're trying to do.
One of the things that we received recently, in the autumn of last year, is a document sent at the very end of the CNR's exercise to the Scottish ministers. It's bundle 27, volume 18, document 2, page 4. And most of this document is actually the overview report, but at the front of it is this chronology. And you see how at the bottom of the section it has, but just over halfway, overall report published 22nd of March 21. There's then individual reports sent to families. Then there's a series of individual final meeting with clinicians. And then there's a final core project team meeting, which is followed on the 6th of July by the final individual family meeting. So people have been moving forward since 22nd of March. And these people, these families, don't know that you've decided to reserve your position on whether to accept the conclusions, do they?
We didn't look at it like that.
No.
Okay. I think in hindsight, you're describing I don't know what you're describing, but you're describing a series of thoughts and so on that we didn't look at it like that.
You've just explained to me that you have noted there's been some more evidence has emerged, you said, about these issues.
Yeah.
Would I be right in thinking that evidence largely comprises a report by Professor Leonard and Mr. Brown, 3 reports by Professor Evans, and the HAD report.
Yes.
Yes. So those would have had to be instructed by the health board, wouldn't they?
Certainly the hard report was. I'm not sure if the Professor Leonard did. Yeah, probably. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so someone would have had to ask them to
I'm
do
not
it.
exactly sure how that came to be.
Yes, so when did the health board decide to revisit and look at the question of the case notes review and challenge its conclusions?
I don't know.
Because Professor Brown says in his statement, paragraph 125, that he was not involved in 2024 discussions, if there are any, resulting in a decision to revisit what he describes as the health board's acceptance of the findings and conclusions of the CNR. Did you discuss these issues with Professor Brown before he retired?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
And I wondered if we can just think about this. You've explained that you weren't thinking about this issue in the way I've set it out, i.e. a question of what do we accept the conclusions, and you've explained how you were focusing on the recommendations and moving forward. Did you report any of this to the board?
Of our thoughtfulness about the...
Yes.
I'm sure we would have said to the board that we'd sent back a large number of comments.
Well, can we look at the board?
Sorry, my fault.
A large number of comments. Well,
Right.
can we look at the board report, your report, to the board on the 27th of April 2021? So the report is at bundle 37, document 58, page 1049. Well, the report's actually referred to at 1054. And so there's a minute here describing paper 2111. Do you see at the top there? Presented by you?
When was this meeting, if you don't mind?
Go back to page April 21. Go back to page 1049.
April 21.
Yeah. So it's I think it's the first board after the CNR is published.
Okay.
And if we go back to 1054, we see a recording in the formal minute of your report. We'll come to what your report says at the moment, but the second paragraph, you describe how the Oversight Board and Case Notes review papers been published in March. You said that the Health Board acknowledged there were lessons to be learned and recognised that these issues have had on patients, family and our staff. And you reiterated the board's sincere apologies for the distress caused. And then if we look at the report, which is the same bundle, but it's document 59, page 1068. So this is the report sponsored by you, and the CNR is addressed in paragraph 3 on page 1072. So you see, if we look at this description, I'll give you a moment to read this.
Okay.
And on the next page, and just for completeness, when we get to when you say so, we'll go on to the next page. But please let me know when you want to go.
Okay.
The next page, please. We then have a summary.
I beg your pardon. What did you say?
There's a summary continues here, covering both the Oversight Board and the CNR. Now, what I want to put to you is that nowhere in this report by you or in the minute of your report to the board do you set out that the board had a large number of concerns about the CNR presented to it in those documents that were presented in February.
So the board were notified through a kind of a a notification from, I can't remember if it was the chair or the comms department, but about the publication of the reports. And there was also 2 board seminars, briefings, whatever, in the weeks after the publication of the case note review on the oversight board to brief the board in more detail on what the issues were. So there was 2 opportunities, and we did do that.
So you briefed them about the concerns?
We briefed them about the overall position, including that we had sent back a large list of factual accuracy questions.
Factual accuracy questions?
Well, in terms of our feedback to them.
Yes, so the thing that I'm trying to work out is, I suppose, two parts to this. One is what the board know, and the other is what's actually in public record in the meetings that are where decisions are made. So let's just look at the minute first. We go to page 1054. At the end of your report on 1055, we have the board noting the update. And so what I'm going to put to you is that the board take no decision about accepting the recommendations or indeed accepting the conclusions of the CNR. They simply note what you are doing. Would that be fair?
I haven't read that minute in detail, but yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. And if you did report the nature of the concerns that were raised in that long document sent in the end of February and March, that was done in the board seminar?
Yes.
Right.
And there was also discussion, as I recall, I don't remember the exact conversation, but there was also discussion about what we're going to do about things, but also in amongst all of this, there was still within the report, within the case note review, a kind of level of there wasn't absolute certainty on, because it says probable, possible, and so on. So one of the issues I think we were concerned about was, A, what does that mean? And so it wasn't certain in the case note report about A equals B, or A has this impact on B. So there was quite a lot of uncertainty still about whether A caused B. I mean, the report says that in terms of probable, possible, and says somewhere in it, I've forgotten the exact words, but to the parents, we recognise that.
They point out they can't have a definite link for any of them.
Something like that.
Yes, they do that. Now, does that make any difference to the need to, or do you need to obtain the approval or be accountable to the board for the decision you have taken not to address the question of the board's conclusions specifically in the board statement?
We didn't really discuss it in the way you're describing,
Right.
and I can't say it any more firmly than that. We said, rather than arguing about and spending our time arguing about whether the content was right, wrong, or indifferent, or whether the methodology was right, we took the view, and I think the board did as well, that if there are lessons to be learned, whether there's 100% certainty or there's other things, then we should move forward and put in place actions to ensure that we've done everything that everyone can think of for the future, should anything else ever occur in terms of those things. Because quite a lot of the recommendations in all of those things were about more generic things, if you know what I mean, that the board, like data and so on, that would be helpful for the future, and making sure that we had the data and it was in the format that people had recommended. So those kind of issues, rather than having an argument about, we're splitting it into a kind of different categories that I'm not sure really was the subject of the debate.
No, I'm going to have to push back. I don't. The CNR have done two things. They've one thing. They've done one exercise and produced two sorts of conclusions: a conclusion on infection link and a bunch of recommendations. And you would like us to think that these are separate in some way. Is that?
No, what I'm saying is we didn't. I can't say it actually more clearly. I'm trying to. we focused our mind on not arguing about whether the conclusions were right or wrong, but how to move forward. That's what we did. We didn't sit and...
Do you therefore lose the right to change your mind 3 years later?
No, I don't think so. I think I think that we were trying in a due process to try and be as clear as we could be and to remove some of the uncertainty.
To what extent do you think that this case notes review report engages the board's corporate duty of candour?
There's been quite a lot of discussion about the duty of candour, and I think it has been an issue in all of the reports, actually, in terms of what the definitions of duty of candour are, of organisational duty of candour, and when is an incident not an incident. There was all issues about patient safety and all that stuff. And so I think those definitions didn't help matters, and I think I've explained in my statement about we thought the policy was correct. We had tried to validate it externally.
But that wasn't the question I asked you. The question I asked you, did the publication of the case notes review engage the duty of candour? Because it comes after Professor White has done whatever he's done about the policy.
I don't remember if there was an actual discussion. I don't remember.
Should there have been a discussion? Because
there may have been. I'm not saying there wasn't. I don't remember.
Because you've got 3 eminent medical professionals, albeit in a report where you can't see the individual conclusions, expressing the view in public that 33 infections, more likely than not to have an infection to the environment. Does that not engage the board's duty of candour to address that with those families, if you can identify them?
So there was certainly discussion about duty of candour throughout the process, but I just can't recall, and I'm sorry, I can't, at what point the discussion took place. I don't remember.
Are you moving on, Mr. Madden?
I'm just checking myself. Just a couple of things I just got circles on. I really did have one question left, which was, you've explained, I appreciate it multiple times, your understanding of what decision you made and how you approached it in that spring.
About the case note review?
About the case notes review. Do you think that response would have helped to build trust with the families whose children were in the case notes review, now that they hear it years later?
I don't know. We acted in good faith to try and move forward and make sure that we were doing the recommendations. So kind of, I'm not sure that I can answer that question.
Were you trying to build trust with the families at the time you produced this response?
We were, and we were trying to make sure that we were responsive to things that had been pointed out to us as being needing attention.
Thank you. Lord, I'm sorry, I think I probably got to my end of CNR unless
with you, Ms. Grant. First of all, can I just check I heard you correctly and that my note reflects what you said? Now, in the context of the terms in which the CNR report in relation to connection between individual cases and the environment is concerned. Now, you said correctly that they express their view on connection by using the words probable and possible.
Yes.
Now, if I heard you correctly, at that point in your evidence, you said there was a degree of uncertainty.
Yes.
Now, did I hear you correctly and note you correctly?
There was some still, because it was probable or possible or whatever, then it's not 100%.
It's not 100%. Now, if I heard you correctly and noted correctly, you used the expression 100% certainty. In this context, whether or not there was 100% certainty, the thinking was, and at this point I'm paraphrasing what you said rather than the exact words, we should implement the recommendations. Now, again, did you say something to that effect? In other words, whether or not there was 100% certainty, the view was taken that the recommendations should be implemented.
Yes, because quite a lot of the recommendations were about things like data and how to collect things and how to report things, and not exclusively, but there's quite a lot of stuff like that, which, to be honest, would be helpful in going forward, because what we wanted to do was make sure that we weren't sitting, 3 years later and still those things hadn't been addressed. So we wanted to make sure that if the case note review said that it would be much better if you collected data in this way, or you did this and this and this, that we actually put in place the steps to deal with them, so that for the future we would have a more robust position, or whatever the words are. I don't know the word, sorry.
Now I come to my question. Was the position of the board that you were describing to Mr. McIntosh, and indeed your own position, that one requires 100% certainty before one should proceed on the basis that there's a link between the building and the incidence of infection within the building?
So perhaps my wording is not correct. I mean, it's not about the 100% certainty. It was a degree of uncertainty. And as I say, we didn't know which patients were in which cohort. But it seemed inappropriate to start thinking about, well, actually, we shouldn't accept this and we shouldn't accept that. It seems more appropriate to say, okay, if that's the position that the case note review, having looked at all evidence that we hadn't looked at, then we should accept what they've said in the recommendations and move forward.
I mean, can I press you on this? Was the board's position that before they could accept a link, they required 100% certainty?
No, that's what I'm saying, is I think the word wasn't correct, and I'm sorry about that.
Sorry, could you repeat?
I don't think, we didn't have the conversations about we need to be of 100% certainty and so on. That was my language. We didn't. We had some concerns about the factual accuracy of the report. We had some concerns about methodology, but we didn't have the conversation about, well, unless it's 100% certain, it's not this. We didn't, and if I'm portraying that wrongly, then I apologise. It was really about whether we disagree or agree with all of that is not immaterial, but at one level, it's really about trying to apologise for the fact that report says that a number of these patients had been impacted on, and try to move forward. So I'm maybe portraying it wrongly just because we didn't have those kind of conversations. It was more about how do we move forward with the recommendations. And if a report says that you've impacted on patients, then that really isn't good, and we need to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh, anything coming out of
two
that?
questions arise. One is, if, I think you've said it twice now, that it wasn't appropriate to get into whether you accepted the conclusions back in March 2021. Why is it appropriate in 2023 or 2024?
I think there was new things coming forward, the whole genome sequencing that we wanted to check, and also we wanted to get our own view of an external report to see what their view was. So I'm not sure, I don't really remember the exact rationale for doing that, to be honest.
Because there's two issues there. One is that Professor Leonard,
yes,
who wrote his report with Mr. Brown, and Professor Evans reviewed a understandably relatively limited number of samples. And it's Professor Wilcox's evidence that he had access to that, the first go at that, during the whole the case notes review. In fact, there's a section in the case notes review where they discuss why they don't find it useful.
Yep.
And then in the HAD report, Professor Hawkey challenges that conclusion. He feels that they should have taken account of Professor Leonard's whole genome sequencing. So the whole genome sequencing conclusions, to some extent, existed before March 21. The CNR, it's in the CNR, I think it's 7.3, it's in there.
So I think the whole genome sequencing was moving at a pace, of substantial pace. And at some point, and I can't recall when exactly, there was Professor Leonard came and presented to some of the executive team. I don't remember if the board members were there, the chair might have been there, and Fiona McQueen was there, and talked about whole genome sequencing and the fact that things were changing and moving at a pace. And her view was it would have been very helpful if those things had been at that position earlier in the process. And I don't remember exactly when that meeting was, but it did take place.
And then in respect to the HAD report, you mentioned that you wanted to get their views
I think sorry. My
on
apologies.
it, I think is what you said. Do you mean you wanted the HAD authors to give a view on the case notes review?
No. I think we wanted to get some additional advice on because the whole genome sequencing and the whole thing was still a bit uncertain, could we get an additional report?
And was that targeted at working out whether there were flaws in the case notes review, as you understood it?
No.
No. The final thing is actually reminding me, Professor Stevens made a suggestion. So in his evidence, when we discussed these topics with him, he suggested that the board could have carried out their own root cause analysis of the same data that he had access to, because it's the health board's data. Was there any thought given to doing that?
The root cause analysis came, as I recall, more later when Amelia Crichton took over the...
So there was one in 2019, that's what you're probably thinking of. This is in 21. Once the CNR is back, did you as a board think, what we should do is use the data the CNR had been given, because we gave it to them, to do our own root cause analysis?
Others would have been involved in that rather than the chief executive, and I don't remember the
Do you remember discussions about that as an idea?
I don't remember.
No, okay, right. What I want to do now is to move on to the risk registers. And bundle 45 is the NHS GGC corporate risk register. It is one of those documents that is so heavily redacted that it's for very good reasons, that it contains an awful lot of stuff that's nothing to do with this inquiry. It looks rather like one of those reports you used to get in the early 2000s from the Americans. But if we go to the only entry that we can find that relates to water policies, it's in August 2018, page 333. And it's a risk that appears to be added in August 2019. You can see that from an earlier page. And the accountable name is you. It's not you, not Dr. Armstrong for some reason. And the description of risk is failure to implement national guidance, systems and policies in relation to water safety. And then the current risks and controls are listed. Now, what I'm wondering is, why is the appearance of water safety on the risk register why doesn't it actually mention the Queen Elizabeth? And because that's the issue you're dealing with in August 2018, it's the DMA Canyon report and all the consequence of that. When you put it on the risk register, it doesn't actually contain any reference to the hospital.
I can't answer that, I'm sorry. I don't know why.
Do you think there's any responsibility of a chief executive to keep an eye on the corporate risk register and put the major high-level risks on it?
Yeah, we do. The corporate management team reviews the risk register. And as part of the overall process associated with these inquiries, then the whole risk management process has been reviewed and updated.
Because one of the things that we've discussed in evidence largely yesterday, a series of potential deficiencies, the hall noctitherm taps, the air change rate in general wards, Ward 4B ventilation, Ward 2A ventilation, the isolation rooms. And you've explained carefully what you did about them when you learnt about them, and I understand that. But what I want to simply put to you is that none of those appear on the risk register before August 19. And so I'm wondering, could it be that the maintenance of the corporate risk register before that exercise in 19 of reviewing the policies wasn't really up to scratch? It wasn't picking up the risks out of the new building.
So I think there certainly was learning around the risk register, and as part of the process, as I've said, we did complete the review. So I think that risk there doesn't specifically say the QE as you've described, but I think it also recognises that while the QE was an issue, or was the area that we were focusing on, that actually the board needs to be safe as well. So, because this is the corporate risk register as opposed to individual sites or directorates. So I think it is reasonable that we put it as a board risk. I do get your point about, well, the Queen Elizabeth was causing the issues, so therefore, sorry, what was this? The second question is it didn't.
No, do you think that before the late 2019 change of policies and change of approach to the risk register, the board was actually properly using the risk register to manage the risks from this new building?
I think we were trying to, but I think undoubtedly it has improved in the last few years, and it's now a much more, it's given a lot more attention, and it's discussed at every committee meeting, it's discussed at every corporate management team, and it's discussed regularly at the board, so it has a greater prominence now than it had then, and greater attention to it.
Isn't the risk register a tool for the non-executive board members to understand their organisation? They can look at the risk register, see what the risks are, and if something's not there, they can challenge why it's not there, and if it's not going away, they can challenge why it's not going away. Would you accept that part of it?
It's a tool for everyone, the executives and the non-executives.
So if the use of the risk register wasn't as effective as it could be in the past, would you accept that was perhaps a slight governance, if not failing, sort of under success?
I think it's something that we had to improve, yes.
Right. Let's talk about now communication with parents. You can take that off the screen, please. What role did you have in the approval of press statements? But before I ask that, I'll ask you to answer in a particular way. We obviously have you arriving in April 17, and we have the stage 4 escalation at the end of 19. And perhaps the easiest way to ask it, is there a point when you start as chief executive taking an interest in what's in the press statement?
So, press statements associated with, there's a lot of press statements and a lot of press queries and so on, a huge amount. So it's not possible for the chief exec, in the same way as I've described to you as the issues when we were trying to get them approved by the Scottish Government. It wouldn't be possible for the chief exec to nor would it be appropriate. There are really senior players in the organisation who have the ability to do that and do it. A lot through the acute division with the acute management team in terms of the COO, the acute medical director, acute nurse director, a lot through that process. There wasn't a date when, from the 1st of June, Jane decided to, it didn't happen like that. The vast majority of press statements were signed off by or viewed by others in the organisation. Some were brought to my attention, some were. And if you're going to ask me which ones were, I'm very sorry, I can't answer.
No, I'm going to ask you sort of with a due recognition of the fact this answer will be somewhat soft. Is there a point in the narrative as things emerge? So if we think about the relevant times, the water incident starts, the first decant, CDU decant, the summer of 19. Is there a point, the cryptococcus in there, is there a point when you recollect that you're taking a significantly greater interest in the press statements about these events?
Yeah, there was that situation, but it also depended on what the press question was, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't a case of from that time to this time you did this. And I'm going to go back and be really annoying, and I'm not trying to be. The size of the organisation requires that senior players, the players who are in that I've described in sector teams and so on, they're really senior players, and therefore they do sign off things. But there was a time where more came for me to
When was that?
during that period, but I couldn't tell. And it wasn't like from June till July, Jane looked at it. It wasn't. It depended. It was quite issue dependent as well. If there were issues that some of them came to me to review, depending on what the issue was. So it wasn't a case of from that date to this date. And it still wouldn't be today, I don't think.
Are you able to give us a feel for, over that period, how many press statements you would have looked at? In tens, hundreds, 1, 2, this scale?
I couldn't. It wasn't 1 and it wasn't 100. I'm sorry, that
Thinking about
something I've ever thought of.
what you can recollect, how would you respond to suggestions that Greater Glasgow and Clyde's communications, external communications during the period, say 2018, 2019, were carefully worded to protect organisational reputation and not open or transparent enough?
Yeah, we certainly tried to be, with the information we had at that time, we tried to put out a position that did describe the situation. I know that others have made comment on, should have described everything in those statements. I think it's difficult to get the balance right of what you should say and what you shouldn't say. But we certainly did try with the information we had to do it in a constructive way. The stuff that was coming from the IM&T generally was signed off by the IM&T chair. There were other statements that didn't come through that process.
So I think the IM&T chair's view is that some words were changed, for example, mould to damp or sewage to effluent, in a way that it should see it as softening the impact of those words in statements. Is that something you recognise?
I couldn't tell you if that was done or not. I don't know.
Now, Ms Freeman's position in her statement appears to be broadly that the board did not have open and transparent communications with patients and families. How would you respond to that?
Yes, that's why she asked Craig White to look at to help us.
What do you think about whether that had any merit as a point of view?
I think we were in a very difficult set of circumstances, and we thought we were. I still think that we were doing the best we could with the information we had. I think, on reflection, that we should have paused and thought about how to engage directly with families at an earlier stage. I think because we were trying to get the routine, normal processes to do that, when perhaps we should have stepped in earlier and tried to do.
I wonder if I can put to you part of a statement by Ms Darroch, which she gave evidence in the 2021 Glasgow 1 hearing, which is, thank you, page 327, please. The top half of the page. And she's describing the period after the death of her child, and then she says, they're not communicating with families at all. They keep saying in the media they're more than happy to meet with families. They never once invited me personally, never meeting with them. So the communication or lack of communication is absolutely shocking. I think it'd be really good for them to meet families who've gone through this unnecessary pain, but they're staying away from all of us as much as they can. How would you respond to that?
So we did meet the families. We had a meeting, Chair and I, and other colleagues were there. And we also did offer families the opportunity to meet with members of our team. I'm sure we did do that. Whether it was in the whether it was in a more generic kind of way or whether it was individual, I'm not sure. But we certainly were happy to meet with families. We did meet with a group of families, and I know the local teams have also met with families on a number of...
I mean, this particular witness in the September 21 didn't think he had. I mean, I know we're not going to get into any, but do you see there's a sort of inconsistency there?
Yes, I don't remember when exactly that meeting was. So,
Okay.
But certainly there were some. But I do accept that at a corporate level, rather than just relying on, there was our local team, management team, were engaging with families on a regular basis. I think the other thing which we didn't get to was around the families of patients who weren't inpatients. If they had been inpatient but they weren't now, then I think we didn't pay enough attention to that at the beginning, and we should have, and I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Let's take it off the screen, please, and move on to the duty of candor policy. Now, most of this is actually about Professor White and his interactions with that.
Yes.
And it may be the fault of our questions to you, but I wanted to clarify something. If we go to page 52 of your statement bundle, with a bit of luck, that should be question 36. Question 36. Now, we asked you a series of questions in this question 36. Do you see how the second last lines, do you accept that Professor White's criticism is fair? I didn't get the impression that you'd fully answered that in this rather long answer that continues over the page onto page 53 and ends on page 54. Was his and we re-asked you the question in question 36A. Do you accept that Professor White's criticism of the NHS duty of candor policy as it stood in 2019 was fair? And your response is, I believe that Professor White's comment need to be considered in the overall context situation. NHS GGC had sought internal validations policies to ensure it fully addressed the legislation and understood that to be the case. In addition, as previously stated, there was some national clarity required to ensure consistency, and NHS GGC welcomed that clarity. Now, for the third time, was his criticism fair at the time it was made?
I'm sorry, but I don't think it's a yes or no question.
Right.
That's the difficulty here. So I think I've explained in my answer, or I've tried to, that we did seek to make sure our policy was appropriate. We did ask our internal auditors to look at and they all agreed that it was. There was some recommendations in the independent review around the fact that further national clarity was required, and Professor White was in the middle of that, because I think he was the leader for this. If he wasn't the leader, he was one of the components of the key leaders and colleagues who addressed that. I think the difficulties around some of the words and the definition of those words, and I think there was some confusion about that, which didn't help matters. And I think that was our position, rather than us saying we don't think the policy is adhering to the legislation. We thought it was, and some of the definitions were not entirely clear, and national work's required, and I think has been done now to try and clarify that.
So one of the
our policy.
So one of the criticisms that Professor White is that the 2019 version of the policy required causation to be determined before the policy got activated. Do you remember that?
I remember him saying that.
Yes. Now, understanding what you say about clarity and guidance, do you see why having such an element within the policy might actually substantially reduce the number of times the board had to activate its duty of candor policy if it required to show causation before it had to activate its policy?
I think we did some work to see whether our the number of times we were using the organisational duty of candor was different from other people's in terms of size and scale, and we believed that we were similar to other boards. So we did try to look at that, see if we only had one and you had 10 or whatever. We did do that, and we thought we were in the pack. So we thought that we were similar to other people. We did understand that there was some lack of clarity around, for infection control incidents, how would that be reported? So
yes,
that emerged during this time.
That you might expect, because a risk of infection is a known risk for paediatric hemato-oncology patients.
Yeah, so there was no intention to do anything other than be open and transparent and to try and do that. There was absolutely none. It was really around what are the definitions, how does that work, and do we need national, because in all these things you can interpret it one way and I interpret it another way. And also with new legislation, certainly in my experience in the health service, and you guys are all the experts rather than me telling you, but there are times when the policies when the legislation is put in and then policies first round are drafted, then they do have to be amended as things emerge, and that, I think that is fair. And
Thinking back to the end of your office as period as chief executive, by that point, do you think the board had issued all duty of candour statements to all affected families for whom the law requires you to do that? Are you confident that you've made all the necessary duty of candour declarations?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry.
What steps did you take to ensure that you had done that?
Other colleagues within the organisation would have dealt with
You
that,
didn't
so I
feel
personally didn't do that.
Because I realise you got involved in understanding why Professor White said what he said and revising the policy. At that point, did you do anything to sort of look back and to check that there haven't been examples of incidents in the past, particularly related to the Queen Elizabeth, where the health board should, if it had had the policy that was actually correct, have made a duty of candour declaration,
No.
but hadn't? It didn't do that? No. What I want to do now, Ms. Grant, is to I've got a section which rather unfortunately I described as significant criticism. I want to pick up some series of criticisms at the end. And what we'll do is when I've done that, which might take us about half an hour, we'll have a short break to see if there's any further questions from my colleagues from the core participants in the room. And the first question is thinking about just the Queen Elizabeth and no other part of your duties. And perhaps the period from your arrival until the commencement of the stage 4. What do you think personally you should have done differently?
I think in hindsight, if there had been, if all the information that's available now had been available then, which it wasn't, then clearly action could have been taken sooner. But I would need to stress to you that there wasn't the information available, and during that period, we were trying to deal with the issues that were raised.
Are you saying that you should have done something differently in there? Because I didn't quite get it if you were trying to say that.
I think of the information that we have now, the problem is we're looking back in hindsight. And at that time in 2017, some of these issues weren't to the fore that they are now. And later on, when in 2017, we certainly started to take action, and things were already going on in 2017 around things like ventilation. So I think it's being portrayed that nothing was happening, and that isn't correct. It was happening.
If we go to your final part of your statement, so actually at the end, question 85 on page 88 was, is there anything further you want to add that you feel could be assistance to the inquiry? And over the page on 87, you start, there we are, yes, 89, sorry, my mistake, 89, thank you. The second paragraph, you see, you said it is, however, incumbent on all parties to reflect and consider how best to address very complex issues that often do not have an easy solution. The period from 2018 onwards was one of unimaginable complexity, with the infection control and performance escalation, the COVID pandemic, and the need to take legal action against the main building contractor of the QHRHC. How do you respond to the suggestion that the period from 2018 could have been significantly less complex if the board had reacted promptly to concerns about the ventilation system as they emerged, both before you arrived and after you arrived in 2017?
We were trying to deal with things as they emerged. So we were trying to do that. I think the set of circumstances that then came upon us could never have been imagined, frankly, or I certainly didn't, and I don't think anyone did. And then the multitude of things that were happening was very difficult to deal with, all sorts of issues. I think the ventilation only became a bigger issue as we went on. In the first period in 2017, the hospital had already been open for 2.5 years, and it hadn't been a huge issue in terms of infections and so on. So now looking back, there's a different lens to be applied to that, but at that point there was not.
Again, thinking about this paragraph, how do you respond to the suggestion that events since 2018 could have been significantly less complex had the board responded in a more welcoming manner to the raising of issues by 3 whistleblowers in September 2017?
But the issues from the whistleblowers, we were addressing them.
But what I mean is, part of Dr. Redding's reason for going to stage 2 is that she didn't know you were addressing them. So if the board had been a bit more, I wouldn't go as far as saying grateful, because that pushes it too far, but gave the impression that it was glad to be told these things, would that not have prevented some of the later problems occurring?
Certainly in my interactions with Dr. Redding, there was no, I can't remember what the language you used there, but unfriendliness or whatever, I can't remember what you said. I tried to use like
welcome and glad.
Unwelcome, right? Yeah. There was no unwelcomeness about my response to her. I'm unaware, and I do know you said yesterday, I think that there was different views of how welcomed or otherwise their contributions were. But the key matter here is that we took action when they raised them. We tried to deal with them. I'm unable to make a comment really about whether they were, how they felt about they were welcomed or otherwise. I don't. But certainly the board at that point, in the autumn of 2017, took on board the points that were being made and tried to address them.
This is perhaps a small question. We've discussed how the board subcommittees have their minutes sent up to the main board.
Yep.
But as I understand it, the minutes of the delegated committees are not publicly available. Do you think it would help for visibility and transparency if in the future they were, because so much of the board's business is done in subcommittees?
I think there's two things. One is they are available through FOI if required. I appreciate that's a different thing from what you're suggesting. And I think that also the reason the chair asked for the subcommittee chairs, if you understand what I mean, to give an update of the board of the 3 significant, so at the end of each committee now, then the committee is asked to agree what issues should be put into the subcommittee report, if I could call it that goes to the board. So if the subcommittee chair says that should be raised or whatever, then the generally 3, but it can be more than that, that is reported to the board, and the subcommittee non-executive chairs update the board on those issues. But
would it help transparency to actually put the subcommittee minutes on the website so people don't have to do an FOI, or it doesn't have to be an issue that the subcommittee chair realises is of interest in order to get noted?
It could be. But as I say, the attempt to do that was around trying to get the subcommittee chairs to update the full board on the key issues from their committee, so that rather than the people having to go through the whole minute, then the subcommittee chairs were asked to bring to the attention of the board key things.
Thank you. I think I've got this in a not very good order, but I'll come back to this now. So do you think there's an apology to be given to the whistleblowers and Dr. Inkster for what happened to them for raising concerns about infections in the environment of the Queen Elizabeth? And if not, why not?
I think that the whistleblowers, it's been a very difficult debate with whistleblowers. I think we have tried to treat them with respect and with due process. I think they have been dissatisfied with some elements of that, but we have put in place, senior people who hadn't got things to do with this to look at their concerns. I think that we have tried to address their concerns in a constructive way.
Is that a yes or a no?
It's really neither. Sorry.
Well, I mean, if the question is, are you willing to apologise? One of the answers is yes. and here's an apology. And the other answer is no, and this is why not. Is there another position?
I think in order to apologise, you have to be sure that, how shall I put this? There have been a significant amount of issues raised. There has been different approaches from the whistleblowers are not all one person, they're
No.
different. And so therefore, some of them have been incredibly challenging to try and work with in a constructive way. We do require to have people to be team players. And so therefore, I don't think it is, and that doesn't mean that they shouldn't whistleblow. That is absolutely what people should do if they feel that they are not, for all parts of the board. And that does happen. There are whistleblowers throughout the board. And I think it's difficult to answer your question in a yes or no way, because I do believe that in good faith we tried to deal with the issues that were being raised.
Really sounds to me like a no. What you're saying is, and this
Probably
the,
is no.
answer which the question invites is you've nothing to apologise for.
I do understand that they have concerns. I do understand that. But I think we tried to deal with them, so probably it is no.
Given taking your answer as a whole, so I'm not going to attempt to repeat it or pass it, but taking your answer to those two questions as a whole, do you think answers like that encourage future whistleblowers to step up and raise issues?
So as I think I've described to you, we've done a huge amount of work around whistleblowing, and I won't go through all that again. I think we have tried to, and do try with all whistleblowers, to address the concerns. We also try to support those who whistleblow, and we try to support those who have been whistleblown against, if that's a word, I don't know, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
And so, and as I said to you yesterday, there was a review done by Charles Vincent and an external HR person. There were recommendations from that, and we've continued to move forward on that.
But if you take all those things together, do you believe, I think there is a yes or no here, that the effect of all that is that disclosures of concerns about wrongdoing or failures in performance or inadequacies of systems or any of these things is now encouraged in NHS Greater Glasgow?
Yes, I do believe it is.
Now, Ms. Freeman has in her witness statement that she considered that in 2019 there was a failing in the organisational duty of candor. Not the policy, but the implementation of it. Do you accept that criticism?
Certainly my understanding, and I wasn't involved in this conversation, I don't believe it was that there was a lot of discussion about whether organisational duty of candor or what the situation was, and it was felt by those in the conversation that it shouldn't be, and that was a judgment they made.
Do you think that clinicians were being provided with sufficient information to exercise the duty of candor policy in 2019 in the Schiehallion?
I couldn't answer that because I don't know. Sorry.
I'd like to end. Oh, no, before I end, I've got another question. Sorry. This is the problem about changing your mind when I listen to changing my mind when I listen to your questions. Can I take you to the Vale of Leven report? So this is bundle 51, document 2, and it's the summary, so it's page 230. Now, just a sort of matter of history, you were actually part of the internal investigation team and gave evidence to the Vale of Leven inquiry.
Yes.
So I'm presuming you, a long time ago, read this.
Long time ago.
Long ago. Page 230. Now, it's actually on page 232 that I want to go to. In fact, it's not at all. It's on 238. Sorry, my lord. Yes. It's the importance of questioning. You see on the right-hand side, there's a heading in blue, management. It was surprising how managers at different levels of the organisation, like GGC, failed in one of the most fundamental aspects of management, namely to ask questions. Now, obviously, the rest of the discussion is the facts of the Vale of Leven Hospital. do you think there's a criticism that can be made of you and the senior management team that prior to the DMA Canyon report emerging and the arrival of Professor Steele, for the reasons you have explained, that you weren't asking the right questions for the reasons you've explained, that you were looking forward and trying to work, but you weren't asking the right questions?
So I think it's easy to look back in hindsight and think, well, actually knowing what we know now, at that time we were asking quite a lot of questions of our estates colleagues and our facilities colleagues and so on about exactly what was happening. There's quite a lot of emails and correspondence asking people what's happening about this and what's happening with that. And certainly the acute division team were also asking questions. Dr. Armstrong was asking questions. And as part of that, they were briefing me and I was asking them questions. So I think there was quite a lot of questions. And I also think that the board, as I'd said to you before, and sometimes we are confusing the board, the organisation, and the corporate management team, if you know what I mean. But I think the board, in its sense of the non-executives and so on, we're asking quite a lot of questions and continue to do so. And some of those discussions, I mean, all of the discussion in every topic isn't in all the minutes, but I can assure you there was a lot of scrutiny and questions to executives from the non-executives about issues that were emerging. There was.
Final question is to put to you the views of a parent set out in a statement of inquiry. Now, this is the Glasgow 1, Statement Bundle 6, page 142. It's the statement of Professor Cudahy. And it's paragraph 318. Now, this is in a section called Duty of Candor Overview by the Professor. One of the difficulties, Ms. Grant, is that not only did we give you a lot of documents, we gave the computer a lot of documents too. We go to page 142. So I want to look at paragraph 318. So paragraph 317, Professor Cudahy describes the care provided to his daughter by Dr. Sastry. And in 317 rather, and 318, he then says this. If we could zoom in, please. The same cannot be said for my experience with NHS GDC corporate services, chief executive, directors and senior managers, who I find individually and collectively to be duplicitous, overly defensive, devoid of emotional intelligence, and lacking in integrity with concern more for their reputation rather than patient safety. They infuse a sense of distrust through a culture of secrecy, fueled at best, and as stated previously, by dysfunctional, at worst, corrupt practices. Now, I should point out that I've not seen evidence of corrupt practices, but looking at the rest of that question, that paragraph, how would you respond to that as chief executive at the time he's dealing with?
Yeah, Professor Cudahy did make his views known to us, to the chair and I, and we did try to answer his questions.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
Sorry. Professor Cudahy did make his concerns, or some of them, known to the chair and I, chair and me, and he did talk about some of those issues when we met, and we tried to address some of his concerns. And we did work through the Oversight Board as well with Craig White to try and make sure that we did address some of those, the concerns that families had raised, to be more proactive and also to ensure that the mechanisms for feedback, as in of concerns, were much easier for families to address. I think we did put too much emphasis on the local teams, which is what we normally would have done, and I'm aware that Professor Cudahy had some serious concern.
Are there any of those concerns that you, to any extent, would accept?
I think, as I've said, at a corporate level, colleagues didn't stop and look at the issues, and we struggled, I think, when we weren't certain, to put things out into the public domain of which we weren't certain, because if we did, then we were if we weren't sure, then we didn't want to add to the complexity of the situation, and I think that on occasions didn't help matters. And so I think we have reviewed that and thought carefully about we should have done that in a different way.
Thank you. Lord, I think that for me, that's where I am at the moment, and I wonder if we might additional 10-minute break at this point.
Ms. Grant, as Mr. McIntosh has explained, he wants the opportunity to check with legal representatives as to whether there are other questions to be asked. So if I could invite you to go back to the witness room, and I would hope to be able to start again, if we need to start again, in about 10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Please stand.
Ms. McIntosh?
Well, there are four and a half questions I have from the room.
Perhaps 4 questions, Ms. Grant.
Ms. Grant, the first question relates to an email which you've probably never seen before, from the 26th of June 2015, and the question of whether there was sufficient information for the board to know to act. It's bundle 12, document 225. I think it might be document 25, page 225. There we are. So it's an email from Dr. Peters, who was then Sector ICD for South Sector, to Mr. Walsh, who was ICM at that point, co-chair of the Water Safety Group, copied to 2 other Sector ICDs, Dr. Inkster and Dr. Wright. And what this email contains is a series of lists of issues. And the first one, Legionella in new build, requested results in writing to enable clinical risk assessment. And this third one, water, need full reports to ensure Legionella not in any of these outlets when that information becomes available as above. Is that not actually a request for L8 risk assessments? That's something that would have been the DMA Canyon report that she was asking for in 2015.
I couldn't answer that, I don't know. I'm sorry, I've never seen that email before.
Yes, and then the second item, ventilation.
Well, I appreciate you haven't seen the email, but did you answer Councillor's
Yes,
question?
so what I'm trying to say is
Oh,
do you
yeah.
understand why one might think that a reference to Legionella in a request from a sector ICD to the co-chair of the Water Safety Group in June 2015 is an early indication that Dr. Peters was asking for this information as early as 2015, and you didn't find out about it until 3 years later, because you were told by Professor Steele?
I guess there's probably a lot of emails in that period around 2015 about things that were going on. I'm not sure. Sorry, could you repeat the question bit of it? Sorry.
Well, let's just look
Apologies.
at it and then I'll ask a better question, I think. If we then look at the second item is BMT, accommodation adults ventilation.
Yep.
Third item is water. Fourth item is about the details of lobbied isolation rooms. And the request at the end is please advise how best to tie all this together and take matters forward in as an efficient and coordinated manner as possible. And what I'm putting to you is that the board, in the form of its ICM and its co-chair of the Water Safety Group, and this is just one example of a number of emails, including the letter of resignation that follows a week later, of these issues being brought to attention of the board as early as 2015. So one can't say that the board didn't have information about these issues as early as 2015. And how do you react to that?
So was there an answer to that?
We don't have the answer.
So we don't know.
We don't know.
So it's quite hard to, certainly that's clear about the issues that were being raised, but what I don't know is what was done about it, and some of them I recognise, some of them I know little or nothing about. So yes, it is clear that colleagues were raising issues. It's clear.
The next issue, take it off the screen, please, relates to a statement that was reported in the press in, I think, 2023, by Sandra Basillo. And if I remember correctly, the statement was that she was reported to have said to a colleague that one of the parents, he may have won the battle, but he won't win the war, or something like that. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Big press reports.
Yes.
What did you think about that when it happened?
I thought it wasn't appropriate for people to speak about colleagues like families like that.
And did you do anything about that?
I spoke to the director of comms, who fully apologised for that, and she apologised and gave an undertaking that wouldn't happen again, and also apologised to other colleagues within the board.
The next issue relates to water, the water issue in the summer of 18. So when you received the DMA Canyon reports, and you've explained carefully how you received it and who you passed it on to, and we know that Dr. Armstrong then passed it on to Dr. Inkster, and you've explained you passed it on to Ms. Kane, and we know you set up a working group. But what did you do personally to review the water testing and the work done in the past to support water, to manage the water system and risk?
The water testing.
Yeah, what did you do yourself
So the
to look backwards?
So the water testing had been raised as part of the 2017 SPAR. And so that piece of work was ongoing through that process. And I was given regular updates on what was happening about.
So you already knew there was, I'm not sure an issue is the right word, but you already know that there was a desire to have access to water testing results.
The water testing which was in that SPAR in 2017.
But when you think about the DMA Canning report arrives, it has all that red on it, if you remember.
Yes.
What's your actions as the chief executive and duty holder that you take to work out whether the water system is being safely managed at that point?
In 2018.
In 2018.
Well, that's why we tried to take immediate action to make sure that the issues that were raised, because some of them were about paperwork and training and stuff, and some of them were about actual things. So Mary Ann and her team absolutely got on top of that very, very quickly and put in place the issues and reported that back on a regular basis.
And we've already discussed the entry in the corporate risk register,
yes,
number 45 in August of that year. Did you do anything to ensure that this risk was on the risk register, or is that the arrival of that item, is that caused by some other investigation? Like Mary Ann Kane or by Mr. Leaper or one of the other?
It probably was, but I'm not entirely sure which was the catalyst for putting on there. I'm not entirely sure of that.
Thank you. If we can go back to your statement, this is page 89, well 88 actually, the very bottom of it. I didn't ask you about this paragraph. After describing the board, you say clinical services, the last line, within NHS GGC are of a high calibre. And I regret that, over the page, significant concern and distress is added to the families, patients' families and our staff over the few years associated with these issues.
Yes.
In respect to the patients and their families, do you feel any need to turn that expression of regret into an apology?
I think it's, I am sorry that patients who already had, and families who already had a series of incredibly difficult situations to deal with in terms of their illness had this additional,
Thank you. Lord, I'm just going to glance at the people who asked those questions, and thank you, Lord. Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Ms. Grant, excuse me, Ms. Grant, that is now the end of your evidence, and therefore you're free to go. But thank you for your attendance today and yesterday, and thank you for the work that has gone in reading background material and preparing your statement. But you're now free to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. McIntosh, am I right in thinking it's Professor Bain tomorrow morning?
It is. Mr. Connell is taking that with us.
Right. And
it's probably worth...
Miss Emery in the afternoon?
No, it's Miss Emery on Friday morning, and in the afternoon, I think we've previously told core participants, probably make it very clear to anyone watching online, in the afternoon will be Mr. Wright on Friday afternoon.
Okay, so I've got my times on.
So we did think we would have an early finish on Friday, but we won't now. The consequence of which will be a week on Tuesday, in the Tuesday of the final week, when Professor McMahon and Miss Ward give evidence in the morning, there won't be an afternoon witness. So we're going to run the full days this week, the full days next week, but in the final week we'll have a shorter first day on this final week.
Right. Okay, so just if I'm following that, Professor Bain tomorrow morning, and then in the afternoon?
No, on Friday we then have Miss Emery and Mr. Wright. So Bain is the whole day tomorrow. Right. I'm not sure she will be the whole day, but that's what we allocate.
No, that's what I'd forgotten. Right. Well, if I could wish everyone a good afternoon, and we'll see each other tomorrow.